Hey all, here at OS Reviews. You're watching our quick hands-on review of the Symbian's Tango Tab. This is a low-cost Android tablet that has a 10.1-inch display and sells for under $140. Now, this is a pretty competitive price category. We've already seen a fair number of low-cost Android tablets recently that have a 10-inch screen size. For example, the Venkyo Matrix Pad, also the Dragon Touch Max 10. But what sets this one apart a little bit is it supports a optional keyboard dock, kind of similar to a 2-in-1 convertible laptop. So if you get the version that comes with a keyboard dock included as part of the package, it can become more of a versatile 2-in-1 machine. In terms of specifications, it's again pretty competitive with the other models that I just mentioned. It comes with 3 GB of RAM, 64 gigs of built-in storage, and it also has built-in GPS, in addition to the standard Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, in addition to a quad-core processor from MediaTek. There's a typical selection of accessories in the box, including some adapters for the charger branded by the company, and we also have a micro USB cable, which is used for data transfer and also for charging, although they also include an additional proprietary charging adapter, which is a very small round tip, which is a little strange. The reason being the micro USB also supports OTG, so if you want to use that port to connect to other keyboards and accessories, you can still charge it using a additional charging connector. Also a hard carrying case, which is pretty fancy. It's made of this foul leather material. It has this red accent running across it, says Symbians, and if you open it up, it's magnetic and also acts as a kickstand for popping it up and watching videos. It does mean that the standard version unfortunately doesn't give you the keyboard dock inside of the box. If you want the keyboard dock, it's going to run you for around $10 to $20 more, which I think could be worthwhile because again, it's a differentiating feature that you might as well have if you want to get more productivity and typing done. Now, it's also really important that the Tango Tab is not new to the market in the sense that they've released this name for a year or two already. So if you pick up the model from 2018 or 2019, it has slightly weaker specs. This one is new in 2020 and has the, again, 3 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of built-in storage, as I'll show you guys in a moment. But the older versions had 2 gigabytes of RAM and 32 gigs of storage. So be sure to read carefully in terms of picking up the correct version. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's take a closer look at the design of the tablet. It's constructed entirely out of a soft touch rubber material, so mostly plastic, but it is surprisingly hefty. We get plenty of I/O, much more than the other tablets that I just mentioned, including a full-sized USB Type-A port that can be plugged into keyboard, mouse, thumb drive, so on and so forth. There's a micro HDMI port to connect directly to a TV using a wire. There's that micro USB port. There's a standard 3.5mm headphone jack. Here's the proprietary charging port if the micro USB port is being used, and there's another flap that covers up a micro SD card slot for expanding the built-in storage. Then on the edge here we have one of the speakers. The other one is found on the right side, so yes, this does have stereo speakers. And then on the very top there's access to the power key in addition to volume controls. Now, first thing I will say though is that this tablet by no means has the smallest bezels, but for a tablet you're going to be holding it on the edges, so it still is all right. Let's do a quick size comparison. We have the aforementioned Venkyo Matrix Pad, which is actually selling for $150, so it's going to be a little bit more expensive. Would have liked to see a Full HD 1080p panel, but again, it is a trade-off considering that this one is slightly cheaper, in addition to having more features like a full-size USB port and also that keyboard dock. Values in terms of memory and RAM as far as the 10-inch tablets are concerned for under $140. So looking past the front design, if we take a look at the OS experience, we are talking about a very stock install of Android 9.0 Pie with that classic swipe up gesture to access the drawer of applications. It's very clean, so there's hardly any bloatware that's pre-installed, and there's access to that kind of Google Now bar on the side, in addition to kind of newsfeed and articles as they kind of roll along. And you can see here that scrolling for the most part is good enough. Occasional jitters here and there, but it's not going to really detract from the overall experience. Still is, for the most part, relatively fluid and responsive. Now we have our typical Google apps which are pre-installed, including access to YouTube, Google Maps, Drive, Gmail, Photos, so on and so forth. Really the only proprietary app on here is access to the camera, which they're using a slightly different app, as you can see here, but it's a very basic. It will work well enough for scanning in documents, and it does have autofocus, as you can see there. Otherwise, although the screen isn't going to be full HD resolution, it still is plenty bright, and it does offer decent viewing angles as well, because it is an IPS panel, so you can tilt it, look at it from various degrees, and it still looks decently clear. Now, in terms of other properties, including the battery life, if we just start with that, the battery capacity here, I got around 8 hours of screen on time before I needed to recharge it again, which is, I would say, average as far as budget 10-inch tablets are concerned. If we jump into system properties, we can indeed verify that this is the version from 2020 that has 3.1 gigs of RAM available to us. So for the most part, pretty up-to-date as far as, again, these budget tablets are concerned. Not too many complaints there in terms of the system. Security is also up-to-date. Let's take a closer look at how it performs in terms of handling, say, video playback by jumping into YouTube. First of all, in terms of Wi-Fi reception, the strength is also quite decent. We can see that it loads along pretty quickly without too much delay. And overall, we can kind of scrub between different parts of the video, and it all works without too many issues. We can change the volume controls in addition to take a look at additional sound settings, and we can even minimize the video as kind of a floating box. So for media consumption, it does a pretty decent job. And of course, it loads back to the highest resolution supported, which in this case is 720p. And now a snippet of what audio sounds like through the built-in speakers. Alright, so turning things back down, takeaway would be that it does get quite loud and fills up a small space without too many problems. The good thing here is it does have stereo separation, so the left and right side, you do get that distance effect if you're watching, say, a film, a soundtrack. As it kind of moves across the screen, you get to experience that. Only downside of the sound is that it's lacking a little bit in terms of bass. So as you can hear, there's not too much of a thump in the lower frequencies. With that being said, for a built-in speaker, it does a decent job, I'd say. Jumping into Chrome, let's try doing a quick web browsing test next. Let's try jumping into The Verge and see how long it takes to render. This is a fairly complex site, lots of different ads and video elements, but as you can see here, it's actually doing a decent job. It's not going to be as fast as, say, a Snapdragon 855 Plus, but again, we're not expecting it to perform so with a fraction of the price that you'd pay for a kind of flagship grade device. But still, the scrolling for the most part here is actually still quite smooth. In fact, I'd say it's smoother than the Venkyo Matrix Pad just by a hair. So again, not bad at all in terms of the budget price. Now with 3 GB of RAM, it does mean that you're able to keep more apps running in the background, in addition to a few more tabs open in Chrome before you have to really notice any slowdowns or pages need to refresh. In this case, I'd say that it's able to open up at least 5 or 6 tabs before you really notice any slowdowns, and you can still be jumping back and forth between these tabs, and they will be still held in the system's RAM, as you can see there. We have quite a few apps which are running in the background. We can jump back, and they are still there right where we left off, which is good. For multitasking, which is supported by Android 9.0 Pie, we can simply long hold on an app and it will open up on the side here while we do something else, like for example, access the settings or check our email. And we can see that they will still run side by side in parallel, and the speed here is still, for the most part, decent. We can rearrange kind of the bar here in terms of how we want the kind of width to be partitioned between the two apps, and that also works fairly well. Finally, last but not least, when it comes to the question of whether this can be used for gaming, it's a yes, but in terms of really demanding titles like PUBG, you will definitely need to play them at the lower graphical settings, in addition to being more patient with things like load back speeds, because we're not talking about a very powerful system on chip. It is a pretty entry-level Qualcomm CPU, again, quad-core, not octa-core in this case, but I would say fair in terms of the overall performance compared to the aforementioned Dragon Touch Max 10, as well as the Venkyo Matrix Pad. Finally, let's try out a different game. This is going to be Fruit Ninja 2. It's slightly more graphically demanding, I'd say, than the kind of previous title that we just tried out there. And you can see that for the most part, it's keeping along. So for some basic games, works decently. And yes, there is a vibration motor as well, so it will kind of vibrate as you hit different objects and games. So that's more or less it as far as our hands-on review of the updated 2020 edition Symbian's Tango Tab. Again, what's new here is an extra gigabyte of RAM compared to before, and twice the amount of built-in storage, which is handy, allowing you to install more games and more applications before the memory gets full. The system has also been updated to Android 9.0, great to see. Compared to before, there were versions on 7.0 and 8.1, which are of course now more outdated. However, the design of the tablet remains the same as before, which is not too big of a problem considering other tablets in this price range also have slightly larger bezels. But there are some alternatives that have a more modern design, although this one here has slightly higher end specs as a trade-off, in addition to being pretty unique and giving you that full-size USB port. So if you want to plug in a thumb drive, a hard drive, a mouse, a keyboard, that is going to be something that is unique to the Tango Tab. It's not going to be the most exciting thing in the world, but if you're looking for a fairly affordable tablet, you don't want to spend a fortune, but you want something that has, again, access to lots of I/O in addition to the potential for adding a keyboard dock, making it into a pseudo laptop, that's going to be worth taking a closer look at. Not the fastest performance though in terms of graphics, so if you want something exclusively for gaming, you may want to look elsewhere, but for casual web browsing, YouTube video watching, these tasks can be handled without too many problems. You can check out more details if interested in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the Symbian's Tango Tab, the 2020 edition.